All right, so I'm gonna keep running with this. So I'm attempting some nuance. It may be a little bit complex. Connections between ideas that have been like offered like on YouTube and in books, and I'm doing my best to cite them. But I don't mean to sound like an authority on this information or that I'm defining anything because I don't have the standpoint to do that. But I have been exposed to some beautiful aspects of what's called foundational Black American culture and also European Eurocentric culture. I've been exposed to both in my upbringing and in my experience of life, both in loving, working, studying, and living and worshiping and creating. But from this is just my perspective that I'm offering. But what I appreciate, the only reason I referenced the previous video is I wasn't trying to elaborate upon or really point out Eurocentric or what's called foundational Black American, or for lack of a better term, Ebonics. I wasn't emphasizing that with authority or expertise. The only reason I reference that is because what I wanted to suggest is that part of what might be the distinction between how those experiences of language exist and are possible, but also the difference in what can be communicated is a difference in perspective, no less than a sense of self and other. So in Eurocentric language, there's according to Dr. Umar Johnson, there's an emphasis on authority and like turn taking in speaking. So sometimes when you attempt humor with people of a European upbringing, like where I live, you have a lot of like Eurocentric values and styles of like communication. You can really anger someone if you engage them without the right pretext. So like, say there's an actual opportunity for humor or banter that is contingent upon and is viable with with a mundane experience. You have like a you have, some people say, a teachable moment. You have a laughable moment, but you engage them without the authority to engage them or the proper introduction. You can really anger someone from where I'm at if you didn't have the right the right footing to offer a statement of any kind, howsoever you meant it, or what you meant with it, or whether you went by it, or what however so enlightening or humorous you think it was. If you didn't have a standpoint, the authority, the right to talk to me, you piss someone off. And it's a little bit it's probably similar with someone who would be foundational Black American, where it's that you don't, no one has the authority to just be running up on anyone trying to say or do anything. No one has the right to do that, but it might be a different experience. And I think that part of that is because the Eurocentric language, or the experience of reality in economic terms in European society, going back even before the expansive colonialism, would be more of a feudal standpoint, where you have a very clear power structure in a society, but right down to the family unit that is patriarchal, and it's like there's a clear lines of power even in opening your mouth. But then if you go to the African societies that foundational Black Americans share heritage with, you have a matriarchal society, which is a significant difference in the first place, the patriarchy versus the matriarchy. And I think that informs it trickles down into the language. But then also you have more of a communal standpoint, like in the African culture. So I had experiences with my family in Africa as a boy, that I can remember. And the experience of my family of African descent was different, and the way that they looked at me and treated me and talked to me was different. Some of it was favorable, and some maybe not. Like an example would be that, um, like we would share things, like break apart toys to share them, and that can be awesome in that that now we all get to play with something. But if that had been my toy that got broken into pieces, that might not entirely serve me as it would if I got to keep it and enjoy it by myself. So it can both it can there's a value on both sides of things. Now my European family, they would never do something like break a toy that belonged to me, because they have a different approach to property. But they also wouldn't reach out to me or sometimes be as welcoming or as endearing, although sometimes they were when it counted. My European family, when it really counted, they put their money where their mouth is, and they would do so still when it counts for something. So it doesn't mean that they love me any less, but it's just a little bit different expression. And I think it comes from the economic reality that in the rigors of the environment that they come from, and how that would inform the economic structure of a society. You can't entirely isolate it from the rigors of the environment and the challenges of the environment that would be different in Europe than they would be in Africa. But I think that some of the African experience is a little bit more communal and a little bit family centered, and where the European, it's also family centered and communal, but differently, no less than patriarchy, European versus matriarchy, African, and different cultures around the world would be more so matriarchal, but they might inform the language, and also the concept of self would be different, and that would also express that would impact how communication is expressed, both in turn taking and talking, but also in conjugation and syntax that amounts to putting together statements and sentences, where it can sometimes be a lot more eloquent, like in foundational Black American culture and in language styles, what's crudely called Ebonics. Some things that you can say within that heritage, in that those idioms, in that vernacular, are more eloquent and sophisticated than what you could say from a more like linear turn taking consonant pronouncing Eurocentric side, and that's true in speech, but also in things like music and art, where a lot of times a lot of music, it just simply wasn't meant to be sung by somebody that wasn't from the South. I'm being arbitrary with that, but a lot of music, like they would say, like soul music, you can't fake the funk, you can't fake the community is what you can't fake, and the experience of community would impact communication and speech, but also concept of self and other that would also redouble to inform communication and speech. So some of the like the conflict of what might come to a head in like cultural differences between a Eurocentric upbringing and a foundational Black American upbringing. It might not be that anyone was trying to be mean or dishonest in the first place, but it actually might amount to a different sense of self and duties and entitlement would be differently. But so I want to say that another example is like, so you listen to like the birds singing, right? And it's very eloquent. You can appreciate that this is very sophisticated, part excellence, beauty part excellence, grammar part excellence. It's just very beautiful listening to birds, but it's completely unintelligible to a human being, completely. So how might that be? I think that some of it would be that a bird would have a different experience of self than a human would. So like sometimes you see birds doing things where they're like they're chasing each other, or they're flirting, or they're flying in a different way than they normally would, and it's somewhat social when they do that. You usually don't see a bird flying crazy by itself, but you will see birds flying crazy as a group or as a pair. Now, I think that what some of that might be is that their mind is it's less conscious than we would appreciate. It's less self-conscious than a human would appreciate as conscious, yet also more conscious for being less conscious. So it's like a different way of, now we can say appreciate that birds would have to dream differently than people, simply because they're awake differently than we are. They're usually awake way before we are. They're alert way before we are, and they're also getting ready to lay down and go to sleep before we are. So you can appreciate that they would likely dream differently than we do, and therefore wake differently than we do, because we're always both dreaming and awake. So the experience of birds might be something of a dream that's a more vivid experience of, because life is actually a dream, according to Osho. We're actually dreaming this whole time. And that's actually what's so scary about dying, is because that's the only time when you're not dreaming. You're actually awake at that point, and that's where you cease to exist, is when you wake up. And that's pretty crazy. But these birds, they might be dreaming a deeper dream that makes them more awake than us, and you can see that when they're flying crazy, or they're more awake than us, so much so that they're still dreaming. But what I meant to say is that when they're doing this language, what they may more be doing is enunciating the balances in a day, in a nature, with the day and the activities of other creatures and people and animals. They're just expressing the balance. And so you can understand it if you were to just listen to the balance that they're expressing. and it with a different sense within